Mark.
Great, yeah, I'm happy to be here. If I'm going to try to do my best to monitor the chat at the same time. I got to fiddle with my settings here when I share screens, but I'll also try to engage some questions through that. But if folks want to do their, feel free to interrupt, and you can Zoom raise your hand, but if I don't see you or recognize you, feel free to just take yourself off mute and give a holler. I don't believe we're forcing people into mute. And then
That's correct.
So that's how I'm hoping to do it. We'll see how, if technology plays along with us. Yeah, again, my name is Mark Oldmixon. I'm actually the vice president for the Alaska Avalanche Information Center, which is a kind of the umbrella organization for these different regional centers, including the Eastern Alaska Range Avalanche Center that's here in Fairbanks, that we founded about 5 years ago. But also within the Alaska Avalanche Information Center is Valdez and Cordova and Haines. So those 4 regional avalanche centers do different parts, different strengths. Some, Valdez is a big organization. They've got forecasters that are out there on a regular basis, forecasting for Thompson Pass at different elevations and helping the National Weather Service in the city of Valdez. And then Haines and Cordova are much smaller organizations, but they're both providing forecasts for the community of skiers, but also some different industries down in those areas as well. And then Fairbanks is more of an education program. Eastern Alaska Range Avalanche Center shoots for education and observations and helping to generate information coming out of the mountains so that folks like ourselves have more information going down there. We're not at the level that we're providing a forecast yet. Our service area is pretty large, and our budget is pretty small. So we're a little concerned about providing that forecast for the number of users in area that we cover compared to something like Haines and Cordova or even Thompson Pass. So I'll get going with it tonight. My background with Avalanche Awareness itself is I've done a number of different courses, level 1 and level 2s. I've taught the ski mountaineering class here with Outdoor Adventures a couple times. My day job is I'm the director for recreation at the university. So I hang out with Outdoor Adventures quite a bit, but also have, drive a Zamboni and lifeguard at the pool and clean weight equipment. So, but this is certainly one of my passions, and I'm really excited to bring education to Fairbanks to help mountaineers and snow machiners get out into the mountains. Myself, I have, a number of pairs of skis as well as a couple snow machines, and I'm pro all of them to get out in the mountains and have a good time. I take my family out on, Fielding Lake and College Glacier, and then this weekend I'm going down with students, and we're hiking in Castron Glacier and climbing Rum Doodle is our goal this weekend. So I'm not a pro human power versus pro motor power. I want to say that it's very easy to bridge the gap. I love it when snow machines break trail for us, and I love it when the snow machine can get me in many miles further than my weak little legs can. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Try and get the chat visible. So Sean, it doesn't look like I can easily see the chat right now. Maybe if you can help me monitor that and give me a heads up if there's questions or responses in there.
Yeah, I'll just read out questions.
And I lied, now I can see the chat. So I'll do my best. All right, so here we go. That's me, Mark Oldmixon. So tonight's goal is, it's a little bit of a fire hose effect. Is that I'm going to give you just enough information to be maybe more dangerous than you are right now. you're not going to be a certified Avalanche awareness professional or be Avalanche trained by any means. You'll be getting a fair amount of information that will hopefully give you cause for pause, a reason to slow down and say, all right, am I approaching Avalanche terrain? Do I see any of these red flags? Do I have the appropriate rescue equipment? Do I know how to use it? I really encourage you to take this, and it'll help you. It'll help, folks that have a level 1 can know that this will maybe shake off some dust or remind you of some key terms. Folks that don't have any background should go, yeah, okay, I've got all those tools, but am I that fast? Avalanches are serious. I should maybe go out and make sure that I do have all that equipment and I'm really quick to use it. And then next time you're going out, are you able to identify that avalanche terrain? And then it'll help facilitate the conversation amongst your peers and your riding party or your skiing party about different red flags that you see and how you're going to approach the day. So this is awareness level, kind of surface level information. I think it's a really good place to start, and you should all get a reward for showing up and being willing to go down this journey. But at the end of this lecture, you're not done. So the reason we worry about this, avalanches, is that they can kind of sneak up on you, come out of nowhere, smack you in the face, and you've got minutes to survive and figure it out. It's not something like maybe hypothermia where you feel it coming on and you've got a long period of time to make multiple poor choices or multiple good choices to fix your situation. It just can hit you from behind and bury you, and you hope that your buddy has it dialed in to figure it out. We talk about the 15 minutes from the time that avalanche happens and hits you. We'd say that we've got 15 minutes to find our people, find our party, and have them dug out. And digging is a huge amount of time and energy. After that 15 minutes, our survival rate plummets pretty fast. Not to say you can't survive 30 and 45 minutes, but it's going to take a pretty unique situation for that to happen. I've had snow machiners that have survived 45 minutes because their helmet is on and they've got a big air pocket space. People have survived longer because they get stuck around a tree well and there's a bigger air pocket space. So certainly things can happen to increase your time, but that's just a lucky draw. That 15 minutes is where we really want to focus on. And I'm gonna switch now and just do a quick introduction video that will also hopefully catch your attention, kind of give you a snapshot of what we're going for tonight.
Avalanches don't discriminate. They're equal opportunity killers. They affect everyone in the mountains. Whether you're snowboarding, skiing, snowmobiling, sledding, cross-country skiing, hiking, snowshoeing, extreme snow angeling. If you live close to snow-covered mountains, you need to know about avalanches. It really just goes with the territory.
Everyone's really excited. A fresh storm had just come in and dropped over 2 feet of new snow. just blasting rock and roll music, and you get to the exit point. So Mike was finishing his ski cut, and instead of waiting, he just charged right into the slope. And in his first turn, a huge rooster tail of powder came up, and everyone in the group started cheering, "Yeah, go get it!" And then in his third turn, we saw the slope just start to crumble completely. Your heart just sinks because you realize we just screwed up big time. Even though, you know, you've got this organized rescue and you've got people getting to them within 15 minutes, you don't always get that luck that you're going to get down there and everything's going to work out all right. Some of the medical staff initiated CPR, but about 40 minutes after the avalanche had occurred, they had ruled his time to death. After the accident, when we were driving home, I thought, those 3 turns, that wasn't worth it.
Avalanche accidents are so tragic because they affect the entire winter community. I've personally experienced what it feels like to lose friends in an avalanche accident, the devastating ripple effect it has on everybody in the community.
What is an avalanche? There's a lot of different kinds of avalanches, but the kind that causes the most trouble are what we call dry slab avalanche. A slab avalanche is like a monster in a horror film. It lies underneath the perfect facade, this enticing powder. It's just waiting for a trigger to come along, like you, to collapse that weak layer, and then that collapse just goes outwards in all directions. The slope just shadows like a pane of glass. There's no escape. It rockets down the hill, bounces you off trees and rocks on the way down, tumbles you over a cliff. I mean, does any of that sound dangerous to you?
I was not aware, and I did not comprehend the dangers that were out there that day. When I triggered the avalanche, it wrapped me up immediately. Not a second later, I was hit in the back with what felt like a truck. Didn't even have a chance. I ended up laying there in the snow with 2 broken femurs and my broken left arm for between 7 and 8 hours. Had a total of 4 surgeries, still in therapy 3 days a week, trying to learn how to walk again and get use of my body again.
Avalanches are very violent events. 1 out of 4 people are killed by the trauma of hitting trees and rocks on the way down. And after they tumble you to the bottom, then the avalanche debris instantly sets up like concrete. You can't just pop up out of it. Somebody else has to get you out of the snow.
Really fun day. It was beautiful powder snow, blue skies, sunshine, just plow shops, nothing extreme. We were trying to get gnarly or anything. Came around the corner, dropped in. It was great. And then saw cracks shoot out all around me. I did see like the sky for a moment, and then just a whole wave of snow went over my face. I had like a moment of, maybe I can just punch through to the top. And as soon as I tried to move at all, I realized that I couldn't even bend a finger.
The most important avalanche skill to learn is how to read avalanche terrain, which mainly means judging slope steepness. Almost all avalanches occur on slopes steeper than 30 degrees, but you know what? When the snow is sketchy, we can still have lots of fun playing on mellower terrain. We just want to make sure we're not on, underneath, or even connected to steeper slopes. The bottom line is the only time we should even consider getting into steep terrain is when we have safe avalanche conditions.
Some slopes are going to produce much worse outcomes should they avalanche than other slopes. For example, if you're above a bunch of trees, rocks, cliffs, or you're going to get washed into a lake or a gully, the outcome of getting caught in an avalanche like that is much worse than if you're in some big wide open meadow.
The difference between riding in the ski resort and riding in the backcountry is really night and day. In a ski resort, we use explosives and terrain closure to minimize the risk of avalanches to our customers. But outside the ski area, once you step just 2 feet over that rope line, you're in a totally different environment.
Anybody that's going into the backcountry or thinking about going off-piste at a resort really needs to understand that it's a totally uncontrolled environment. There isn't any ski patrol, they're not bombing or doing any avalanche control. It can be really dangerous. So essentially you need to be, your own avalanche expert.
So in 9 out of 10 avalanche fatalities, they're triggered by the victim or somebody in the victim's party, which is actually good because it's not like getting struck by lightning. We have a choice. That means if we learn something about avalanches, we can avoid getting caught in avalanches.
Avalanche safety can seem totally overwhelming, but there is a systematic, step-by-step process that can keep you alive in avalanche terrain. Just knowing 5 basic things can prevent most avalanche accidents. Get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, and get out of harm's way.
Everyone who goes into backcountry avalanche terrain needs basic avalanche rescue gear. You need an avalanche transceiver, a shovel, and a probe. And you need to practice a lot to know how to use all of this gear, because your friend only has about 15 minutes to live buried beneath the snow. A lot of people also use an inflatable avalanche airbag backpack that will help them rise to the top of avalanche debris. How well does this avalanche rescue gear actually work? Well, for 1 out of 4 people killed in an avalanche, they're gonna die from trauma. They're gonna hit trees or rocks on the way down the slope. So avalanche rescue gear isn't gonna do anything for them. The rest of them die from asphyxia, from breathing their own carbon dioxide underneath the snow. But it doesn't have to be that way. If everyone wore an avalanche airbag backpack, as well as an avalanche transceiver, 2 out of 3 people who died from asphyxia would still be alive. The bottom line is avalanche rescue gear will only save about half of us. But in order to stack the odds in my favor, I make sure to never go skiing without them.
As sledders, we travel in the backcountry a little bit differently than skiers, but I still need to have my avalanche gear attached to my body. Having it attached to my tunnel does me no good. If I get separated from my sled, I get separated from my safety gear. If your buddies that you ride with don't have the training and the equipment, don't let them ride with you.
So now that you've got the gear, you've got to get the training. So when you take an avalanche course, you're basically getting keys to a whole new world. You'll learn about avalanche terrain, snowpack, weather, rescue. Essentially, you're trying to take the guesswork out of travel in avalanche terrain.
As a first timer just coming in, it's really important to take the right classes and gain all the knowledge before going out in the backcountry.
Getting the training isn't just taking an avalanche class. It's a great start, but really it's about practicing what you've learned. Make it a ritual. Make it fun. Throw down some lunch money and do some time drills. When it comes down to it, it's about having your friends back and knowing that they have yours.
Not just the skiers that need to get the training, because sleds are taking us further into the backcountry. So we really need to bring our avalanche skills up to the level of our rider skills.
Next, you got to get the forecast. These avalanche forecasters are pros. They're going to tell you everything you need to know. They're going to tell you about the snowpack. They're going to tell you about the weak layers. They're going to tell you where avalanches are going to happen, where you can likely avoid avalanches. All that information is one click away.
To get the avalanche forecast, visit avalanche.ca in Canada or avalanche.org in the States.
Before I even get on the snow, I check my local avalanche advisory.
So take the time, get the forecast.
When you're traveling in the backcountry, you got to get the picture. What's that mean? It means pay attention. Look for recent avalanches. Listen for cracking or wumping that's taking place around you. Look for recent storm snow, wind-loaded snow. Look for rapid thawing. If you look for all these things, you're going to get the picture. You're going to be a safer backcountry skier.
You get out of harm's way in the backcountry by first avoiding suspect slopes and terrain to begin with. We don't want to regroup in avalanche paths, and we don't want to stop or regroup in runout zones.
Some best advice I can give you is when we're out hill climbing and there's a bunch of us, don't go park right at the bottom in the avalanche path. Park on the outside, stay out of harm's way.
Just like you ski a slope, one person at a time. Once you're at the bottom, get out of the way of the avalanche path.
We want you to realize that avalanches are dangerous, but you can avoid getting caught in them. First, get the gear, but then you've got to get the training before ever going into the backcountry. Next, always check your local avalanche forecast so you can anticipate the given avalanche conditions for the day. You can get the picture by looking for the obvious signs of instability, and you'll be getting out of harm's way by managing your exposure to potentially hazardous slopes.
A lot of times when people watch us in the films, all they see is the action of us shredding these big lines. But what you don't see is the behind the scene, all the prep that goes into making sure that the slopes are safe, checking out the snowpack, waiting for snow to settle, doing all the homework it takes to safely rip the big lines.
All this information is great and incredibly practical. But at the end of the day, if you feel uneasy about something, it's about having the courage to say no and walk away. The mountain isn't going anywhere.
It doesn't matter if you've made thousands of good calls. All it takes is one bad call, and that's one too many. Some days the mountains are screaming, get out of here. And some days the mountains are going, come on in, it's time to party.
So I always like to start these classes with that kind of, it gives a really good introduction. It's, you know, it's a classic education of they're going to tell you what they're going to tell you, they tell you, and then they tell you what they told you. And we're just going to do it again. So we talked about our survival rate, and I mentioned that in there. And then kind of some of the reasons that we want folks to be taking these courses to start to think about it. So they're thinking about their avalanche danger before they head out there. Is that you're ahead of the game because you're unaware, or you are aware of the danger. So you're getting some training. A lot of folks will just go out to the mountains and they haven't really thought about avalanches as part of their risk mitigation. Some folks are aware, like yourselves, but are willing to take that risk. And that is your classic demographic of, 20 to 30-year-old white males that are willing, they're looking for a risk, looking for the high adrenaline experience. So they're avalanches, whatever. I'm invincible. I'm young and fit. I can do it. Snow machiners, classic. I'll just pin it and run away from it. Then we make classic mistakes of selecting poor terrain. We're looking for the best picture. That's maybe this run is closest. I'm feeling tired. I don't want to go further in up the valley looking for a better line. This one's the closest, so I'm going to jump on this and not thinking about the terrain traps that are there. We missed the clues of unstable snow that we'll discuss those today. But not so much that we miss them, that we maybe ignore them because we're focused on some other pieces of the day. I'm a dad with 2 kids and a job, so I only get a couple of Saturdays to sneak out to the mountains, and I don't care that there's recent snowpack or recent avalanches or there's high winds. This is my day to ski. I got to make it happen. And we make those some tough choices there. Poor communication. Maybe I see the red flags, but I don't tell my buddy behind it, and he's distracted with a gear problem, or I'm snow machining ahead and I see it, but again, my partner maybe isn't as strong of a snow machiner, and they're focusing on just trying to stay on the sled, and they're not seeing the red flag conditions, and I haven't shared that communication, so it's created a negative environment. And we just travel poorly. I saw some pictures of friends just last weekend that were stacked up on top of each other, 4 people right behind each other going up the slope. And it just increases your exposure to an avalanche. When it does happen, now all 4 people are involved in it, and that's your rescue group. So that's a tough choice. So these are some things that get people in trouble, and we're gonna hopefully address all of those tonight. So we need all these three sides of the triangle. We need all those to come together, and then a human to come in and trigger that experience. We need the right terrain. We need the right type of snowpack, unstable snowpack and steeper terrain, and then weather that creates the temperature. The wind can impact all of that. But that all can just live naturally out in the backcountry by itself. And then a human comes along and adds that additional stress to the equation and causes the avalanche. That's why when we see natural avalanches, that's without the additional stress of a human, the snow has collapsed and caused it to rip away. When we add the stress of just a human skier or a snow machine or 5 snow machines, we're adding a tremendous amount of stress to that equation. And is the environment ready for that stress? So we're going to break it up and talk about all 3 of these, or all 4 of these entities that kind of go into the avalanche equation. So terrain, during the video, it talked about recognizing avalanche terrain and choosing the terrain based on the forecast. A couple different pieces of that terrain. We've got our slope angle, our aspect, and then our configuration. So how steep is it? Which way is it facing? North, south, east, west, and then kind of what are some different shapes of that terrain that I can use to my advantage, or that maybe create higher risk experiences for avalanche. So slope angle, it's really simple mathematical. Between 30 degrees and 45 degrees is the highest likelihood for avalanches. 38, the point of repose, is the prime angle. The challenge is that between 30 and 45 is kind of the best skiing and riding. It's most fun. It's good turns on the downhill. Below 30, it's a little slow, maybe not getting that speed and adrenaline that we're looking for. After 45, starts to get pretty steep and technical and hard. So it's something to be mindful of, because we want to be on that 30 to 45 because we think it's more fun. But below 30, it's just not steep enough to slide. So we're not as stressed about that. So when we have a poor forecast, we've got snow conditions that are ripe for avalanches, then we want to stay on those lower slopes. And that's where snow machiners that tend to play in the trees and stay in the flats and work on their wheelies. And then skiers just take the easier lines. Slopes over 45, the snow doesn't build up, doesn't make that slab avalanche that we're worried about. It constantly is sloughing. It's going through a natural avalanche cycle pretty regularly. So it's refreshing itself. So it's not building up a dangerous snowpack. Aspects, we're worried about aspect in relation to the wind here, because this is the same mountain, the same amount of snow has fallen here, but one side is covered in rocks, the windward side, and then all that snow has come over from where he is and been blown up and over and onto the leeward side. And when it's being blown up and over, it's getting broken up into tiny particles, a ton of different energy and heat, and then slammed in here and packed in there and making a really dense, hard surface called a wind slab. And then typically that's on top of some softer snow. So it's got a really heavy, dense thing on top of something really fragile. And that's what we get concerned about there. So aspect in relation to the wind, and that can be, over the summits or cross-loading it. So here, which side would we say is loaded? And you can just throw in the chat there, left or right. I don't think it's mirrored for you. Yeah, so our right-hand side there, Zach, exactly. So the wind took the snow from over here and pointed it over here and dropped it over here. And that's where cornices are a good indicator of that. This cornice up at the top here, it's pointing towards where the wind's going. And then our other aspect that we're worried about is the aspect in relation to the sun. The Fairbanks and Alaska, lives with it's very connected to the cycle of the sun. We're getting a lot of southern sun, and as the warmer temperatures come back, that sun bakes those south-facing slopes, warms up these rocks and causes all these little point releases, these little slough avalanches. These aren't necessarily the big dangerous ones that we worried about, but it's a clear indication that there's some rapid temperature change happening here. So whenever we hear about a forecast, we see observations, we want to know the aspect that they're talking about, because somebody can come back from the mountain and say, oh yeah, I was down on Golcanna Glacier and there was natural avalanches, and we just stayed away. So, okay, but where were they? On the south side, north side? Was it from a wind effect? Could you see a cornice at the top? What were some of the, what was the aspect of those slopes? And then the same thing when people say we had great skiing down in the Alaska Range this weekend. We were up at Rainbow Basin and skied 12 laps. It was awesome. Which aspect did you ski up there? So that I've got a better idea of what was safe that day. And the reason we're worried about that is that similar slopes behave similarly. So this is the cabins down in Valdez. If you've been to Valdez as you're driving into town, I'm sure 2 of these slid, and then the 3rd and 4th didn't slide for maybe another hour, and then they finally let go. So if we are, we're hearing reports from Saturday that folks are out having a good time on south-facing slopes, then we can have a safe expectation that maybe the next day those south-facing slopes could still be okay. Or if likewise, if they're seeing natural avalanches or they're causing human-triggered avalanches on certain aspects, that it's going to happen the same thing. And I'll show a good example of that. So just trying to watch this video and try and take in as much observation as you are. Maybe you're another snow machine, or you just pulled up to this big lunch spot here, everybody's hanging out, and you're trying to collect the data from the day. What are some signs that you're seeing? So throw in the chat there. What are folks seeing so far for snow conditions? I'm gonna fast forward. Just does it a 3rd time here.
shit. Oh, one, hey. You all right? Yeah, it scared the shit out of me. You know what? You did the right thing, though. You kept on going through it. Yeah? You kept on going through it. Woo. Right. Fucking, I knew that was going to happen. This one slid and that one slid. Why isn't this one going to slide?
So classic right there is, you know, some folks saw in this in the chat there was avalanche debris. See if we can get a good picture of it. You know, there's some avalanche debris here, there's some here, they're going right in the middle of it. The guy right there made the observation ahead of time. Why wouldn't that have happened? So when you go down there and you see avalanche debris, go somewhere else. Don't go in the middle of it saying, oh, well, there hasn't slid over here, it must be okay. Definitely not the case. Some other points there was some pretty, you know, just right here, there's some pretty kind of poor communication between these two. You know, who's gonna go, who's not gonna go. There you can get a better view of the different avalanche debris. You know, they're trying to decide who's gonna go, whatnot. You, me, no, what? Oh, you go, okay. And then they eventually, the time that the avalanche happened, they put 2 people on the slope. So increased their exposure, you know, traveled on slopes that had already avalanched. So really some simple mistakes. Here's another shot down in Thompson Pass, Valdez. You've got these different slopes down low that slid, and then the same aspect, similar slope angle, just a little bit different elevation. They also slid. So it's only really a matter of time before this one would go, or this one. So you want to, you know, just be able to note those observations as you're traveling, even just driving down there. So similar aspect is going to have similar results. The other thing you can do is have a little test slope. When we're digging snow pits, or maybe we're taking a little ski cut or an experiment the day before, you know, we're going in this weekend, we're going in Saturday. We're going to do a bunch of data collection on Saturday, maybe ski a smaller line ahead of time to get a feel for that snow. But a smaller line on a similar aspect, a similar angle with less consequence than the big peak descent. I got a question from Joseph. If you see that an area has already had an avalanche, is it safer to ride on it to completely avoid the area that has already moved? So what you're asking is if you could, if I've got this big area here and it's already slid, can I use that as my travel? Can I make my turns there, snow machine, or ski on that? So that's what's called the bed surface. You can make a case that might be safer, but it's a rapid experience just happened there, a big rapid change to the snowpack. And now you're, you know, some of those crown lines are 3-4 feet deep. So you've got to kind of reset your experience. So this happened at the surface level. Now, if I add stress to it, now I'm penetrating my human factor is digging deeper into the snowpack. And I just have less data about that depth of snow. So it's not necessarily a green light to go, oh, it's already slid, so we can go in there and get after it. I understand where you're coming from, but there's other things to consider before you jump on it. So we talked about slope angle, pretty simple. I should go back with slope angle is you can certainly train yourself to do this, but I also encourage you to get a little tool. I carry a compass that has a plumb bob in it, and I can use that to take a measurement of the slope angle itself. So that little needle that's hanging down there, I can use that to make a slope angle assessment. I also carry this that clips to my ski pole, and I can turn that on, and it comes with my slope angle and then also the temperature. So that's two little tools that that I carry right in my chest pocket or hip pocket, so I can take those out in every little break. I can check the snow I'm on right there just to see the slope angle, but I can also look at the horizon line well ahead of me and check my slope angle. And I do that just to practice. I can say, all right, I'm going to guess mentally, I think that's 33 degrees, and I take it out and measure, and I find that I'm off by 10 degrees. So it's a good thing to practice with that. Joseph's question is, what about the last video? So for the snow machiners, should they be snow machining in the Avalanche slide? I think is what you're asking. And again, I would say it's probably safer than in between the two, that had the area that hasn't slid. But again, I'd have to say, just because it's slid doesn't mean it's good or bad. I'd have to go back in there and look at that snowpack a little bit. It certainly has shed its, I'm going to say that those are some spring conditions, look pretty warm for folks. Definitely not the Arctic conditions that we're used to. So it might have been a recent storm experience that was sliding and that the bed surface was pretty strong. So something to consider, yes, but I would probably just find an entirely different aspect. I'm going to keep going. So slope configuration is what we're talking about next here. So we've talked about the aspect, which way it's facing, the slope angle, and then kind of the shape of it can create good things and bad things. When you've got the slope that comes down and it starts to flatten out and creates a little bit of a compression, that's kind of holding everything up. But as we concave it or convex it, it's starting to stretch and the gravity is pulling things apart and it's creating this tension zone. And that's kind of the trigger spot where that's where skiers will do what's called a ski cut, where I can come in from the top and kind of cut across this tension spot, put a lot of pressure and push on it and try and get the snow to go to see if it's got any push on it, and let it go. The challenge can be that you can have a nice gentle slope, but that has a little bubble on it that drops down and keeps going, but it creates, you're on 30 degrees, and then it has a little convexity that goes to 35, and then it flattens back out to 30. While you're saying, oh, the slope angle is 30, it's great. It is, until you're at that 35 degree, and that's changed the equation enough. So we want to be mindful of those convexities and use the concavities, the compression areas, to our advantage. So here's an example of, from a helicopter looking down at some big slopes, and you can see all these crown lines right on those convexities where the slope angle starts to steepen off and fall off. Additionally, it's unsupported from underneath, so there's really no compression holding it up. We've talked about unsupported, the convexity, and then terrain traps. So again, that's part of the configuration, the shape of it. So all this snow that slid here either went over the rocks, which is a bummer if you're the skier that's falling down these rocks, or it got funneled through this chute. So all the snow is funneling and building up pretty deep snowpack and shooting out a long distance and then over some rocks. So this isn't the space maybe to figure out how to split board. There's a lot of terrain trap penalty there. So we talked about convexities being a trigger point. This is kind of a depressing slide because it takes away a lot of the mountains for us. So now we're going to say that rocks are a trigger point from underneath because they've created a different temperature gradient within the snow. So it's just something you haven't, maybe you've done a lot of analysis of this type of snow, but there's these big boulders underneath that have impacted they're going to change your analysis if you haven't seen them. We talked about cornices and wind slab areas. So the winds come up and over, it's created this giant cornice, but underneath it's created a really heavy wind slab. Trees can be another trigger point the same way that the rocks are, that they just have an impact on the snow and have created a weaker spot. It's kind of like the rocks and the trees make a perforation across the snow slope, so that when it rips, it connects all the dots. And then little cliff bands can do the same because that snow isn't as supported, or it's got a lot of variables in it with all the rock and temperature changes that come with that. And here's an example of that where you've got some trees and some rocks, and people had a really great day over here, and it looks like maybe one person went off a little bit further out trying to get some fresh turns, probably pretty innocent. But all these turns happened, went over here and found this little sweet spot of a trigger with the rocks underneath it, and the crown line kind of connected the dots between all the trees and rocks. This could have, likely there's some sort of temperature change in here. You can see the different slough snow. That might tell me that it's a little bit warmer. So maybe earlier in the day they got 4 or 5 laps in, and then after lunch it warmed up, and their next lap they went over for some fresh turns, and the snow had just warmed up just enough to change the environment. Another quick video to demonstrate how the rock can be a trigger point. This is a video out of Hatcher's Pass. It's a little dated in its film material, but it's fun in that capacity.
Hey, Jake.
If folks have other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat while the video is running. So we got a group of 3 up there. The guy with I'm going to say a big camcorder. I'm envisioning a full-size VHF camcorder on this guy. Big, long, skinny skis. And here's your rock that we're worried about. This guy goes up and jumps it and lands, keeps going. I got a little extra turn up higher. He's gonna avoid the rock. Third guy and a dog. Dog goes on by. Skier number 4. He's gonna go nice and slow off the rock and still got 4 skiers down there. Here's the 5th one. Crater.
Oh.
Now the whole slide, path starts going. Now they start running.
Oh. Can you see him?
I do not see him.
You might want to start getting a move on that.
I am on my way. I got my people. Hey, is that him?
You see him?
Black right there? That dog.
That's a dog. You see him?
I see him.
So just a good demonstration of, a number of different people went off similar points, no big deal. What was the difference with the last person that went off and caused the avalanche? crashed. Yeah. So he, rather than hitting it and continuing on and having that force distributed across the skis and temporary, he cannonballed in there and stuck the landing and stayed there. So he penetrated a little bit further. His force wasn't distributed across his skis. So just that extra little bit of force, maybe, you know, the classic, the other folks loosened it up for him. So we want to just something to think about with the rocks there. That's a tenuous piece. It doesn't mean avoid all rocks or avoid all trees and cornices and cliffs. It's just a piece of the pie that if you're concerned about the snowpack, that this is another reason to be additionally concerned about that area of snowpack. Yeah, so the rest of the slope had been broken up by the other skiers. So there's maybe some of that compression had been separated out. So it was a little bit of a weaker. So we got the trigger points. And then, so terrain traps is another, we've touched on that a little bit here, but you know, this is a big avalanche, but if it had a nice gradual run out down low, all that debris would have fanned out. But rather than, and here it's in a creek bottom, so all that debris piles up and increases your consequence. So creek bottoms are a terrain trap. The rough part is that those are also the highways for us to travel into the mountains. Skiers and snow machiners take the creek bottoms because they're an easy way to travel. Again, terrain traps aren't something you say that you just avoid at all costs, but when you're concerned about the avalanche conditions, I would avoid terrain traps to further increase my likelihood of surviving. Other things that can be terrain traps, we've got cliffs. It's, you know, it's not trapping the snow, but it's increasing your consequence when you're having to go over this free fall of a cliff or tumble over rocks. Gullies that are going to collect that snow, exposed rock that's going to cause trauma to me, trees if I hit those. Benches or roads, a bench, not the sitting bench, but a bench in the topography that's going to, again, collect that snow. My slope angle is here, that comes down and it's going to build up here before it drops off again. So that bench is something to be concerned about. A crevasse, obviously falling in a crevasse is a bad day. Being at the bottom of a crevasse and having an avalanche on top of you is a really bad day. Bergschrund, I'm going to assume that somebody in the class doesn't know what a Bergschrund is. And essentially it's a specific crevasse. As a glacier is pulling away from the mountain and sliding down the valley, that crack right there where the glacier is pulled away from the exposed peak, that's a Bergschrund. And it's really common that these exposed peaks have great ski lines down to a glacier, but you know that there's a gap there. And that Bergschrund could be 6 inches and it's a simple thing to get over, or it could be 6 feet wide and it's a step down, so it creates a really challenging thing to get over. And then bodies of water. Again, that's a really bad day to have an avalanche and then be pushed into a lake or a river. So those are just additional terrain traps that you want to be mindful of what's below you. If you do get hit by that small avalanche that you're willing to take the risk for, but maybe you're in a terrain trap that's going to compound those risks. This avalanche here, this is down at Summit for Arctic Man, and a big avalanche up top, slid down and buried a snow machiner right in the main path that we take into Arctic Man. So a final point about slope angle. We've got our slope angle that we're skiing, but then we're talking about where we're gonna set up camp or even have lunch. You know, we talked in the video, the snow machiner talked about when we're grouped up, watching people high mark, that we're doing it far away from the avalanche slopes. So the alpha angle this is a better description of it. So our slope path is 31 degrees, so it's possible to avalanche, right? This avalanche is going to come out and it's going to reach all the way out into this runout zone, really likely at 22 degrees. So we say that you want to be far enough away, you're going to set up shop in the safe zone at an alpha angle that's less than 20. So what I would do is take my inclinometer and I'm going to shoot a bearing or shoot a measurement from where I'm standing to the top of the avalanche path, to the highest point that I think could let go on the mountain. And I'm gonna look in my mirror, or I can look off to the side and try and get it close and make sure it's less than 20. If it's less than 20, then I can set up camp and hang out. I can turn my snow machine off, have a beverage, take my helmet off and hang out. If it's at 22 degrees, 25 degrees, and my friends are up there high marking, I need to be at the ready. I'm going to be on my machine, helmet on, machine on, and I'm ready. You know, if my excuse is I'm going to run it out, then I need to be ready to go. When that avalanche happens, I don't want to be futzing around with my pull start and trying to put my helmet on and hide my my soda. And that's I can't emphasize that enough. That's a really important piece. I had a student in one of my classes that I shared this exact slide with, and 3 months later she died from not doing that. She had, her husband was up high marking, she was down lower, and she couldn't get out of the way of the avalanche path and died of trauma. So it's really important to be mindful of what's above you and how far away you are from it. Just because you're standing on a 0 degree slope, if you're below an avalanche path, it's avalanche terrain still. It's not just what you're standing on, it's what's above you. Does that make sense for folks? Any questions about the alpha angle? You know, we're thinking about it here in this camp situation. This guy's down here outside his tent, taking an alpha angle, going, "Oh God, avalanche! What's my alpha angle? Am I going to make it?" I remember once we were deep in the Alaska Range on the Pika Glacier, little Switzerland area, and we set up camp, and then it snowed 3 feet on us overnight. And our guide, I was younger at the time and had a guide, and he was in there in his tent using every slice of calculus that he could remember from high school, trying to figure out his alpha angle with topography, with topo maps, because it was too dark out, so he couldn't shoot an alpha angle, because he was worried about, with all that new snow, that it was going to cause a natural avalanche. It was going to take us out in the middle of the night. So he's trying to make that choice. So before we enter avalanche terrain, you know, part of that initial video was, it said to get the forecast, and here's some options to do that. Before you enter avalanche terrain, go to alaskasnow.org and get your forecast. Here's the current forecast for Valdez, and it's saying it's moderate at all elevations. In Valdez, they've got the maritime level, intermountain, and continental height elevations, different levels. So you want to be thinking about where you're going and get the forecast for that area. But again, for Eastern Alaska Range, there isn't one. In Western Alaska Range, there isn't a forecast. So we talked about terrain. Next, we're going to talk about snowpack and really that red flag. I can't get into the level of digging snow pits and talking about snow crystals over Zoom and, you know, a short presentation, but I can give you the visual cues and auditory cues that the snowpack is unstable. So these are red flags that if you see them, the hairs on your neck should stand up and you should really consider where you're going. So this gentleman in the slide is standing down here, and he can see recent avalanches. That should be a question like, well, I probably shouldn't go up there today. If that slid, you know, in the last 24 hours, that's a bad day. And I think folks in Fairbanks can tell old snow from new snow. You've seen weathered snow, things that have been wind impacted. You know, if it's you know, 72 hours old, it's certainly something to consider, but it's not a deal breaker. If it's, you know, 2 and 3 weeks old, it's, you know, again, still something to consider, but it's not a deal breaker. If it's in the last 24 hours, I'd be really concerned about what to do next. So recent avalanches. Cracking or whoomping. So if I'm skinning up a slope and I put my ski in the slope and these cracks of snow shoot out in front of me 10, 20 feet, that's a red flag. Or whenever that snow collapses, I'm skinning across the flats, and the snow goes woof. I just suddenly fall half an inch, and you can hear the echo across the valley as the snow collapses underneath you. That's called a woof. And those are, that first person that's doing that first snow machiner, the first skinner, is typically the person that's causing those woofs. And they need to make sure they're communicating that with their whole group, because the rest of the group might not have that piece of information. They might have saw the recent avalanche, they might see something else, but that woofing is a scary piece. And in the flats, you can convince yourself, well, it's on the flats, this is a different topography, I'm going to be going up high today. So it's something to register. Again, it's not an immediate turnaround, but if we're getting those woofs as the slopes get steeper and as we get further into our ascent, then yeah, you should turn around. And what that is that's a solid layer of snow, and the fragile snow underneath is collapsing. And in the flats, it just collapses and doesn't have anything. But on a steeper slope, it collapses and it has energy to potentially move and separate. And as you're just placing your skis on the snow, it shoots a crack out in front of you. You're creating enough energy for that crack to separate. When it woofs, it's going to crack, and you've separated the snow and had a major disturbance. The next thing we're worried about is heavy snow or rain in the past 48 hours. So that's an inch an hour for more than 12 hours. So a foot of snow in 12 hours. Just again, rapid change to the snowpack. The world likes homeostasis. It likes balance and everything nice and even. And when we rapidly change something, it gets stressed, and it's going to have to adapt fast, and it can't. It takes time. So my classic example is, here it is Thursday afternoon. It's snowing out here now. The forecast in the mountains is snow. It's not huge snow, but let's hypothesize that it's going to be 2 feet of snow Friday night in the eastern Alaska range. It means Saturday is going to be an epic snow, blower snow. It's going to be beautiful. But those are the people that go down Saturday are the ones that I'm not going to ski with, because the snow has just fallen Friday night, big rapid change. So I want to let that natural avalanche cycle pass through. I want the snow to have time to bond to the old layer and kind of create that homeostasis. So I'm going to wait to go until Monday. Is that inconvenient for my work schedule? For sure. But dying is too. So I want to be cautious of that. And that's something that gets people. So it's something to really take consideration of. Don't just go because you've got the day off and there's fresh snow. Wind-blown snow, again, that's it's a rapid change. You're taking a bunch of wind, disturbing that snow and pounding it in there. And it's a really heavy, dense slab on top of usually a weak layer underneath. So wind slab is another red flag. So, and then another rapid change, we talked about a rapid snowfall or a rain event, but if there's a rapid warming event or increase in temperatures, that's again a rapid change to the snowpack. It hasn't had time to kind of balance and homeostasis. There's a big, just a big change there, and it becomes much less stable. So we've talked about the slope itself, the configuration, and then the snowpack in terms of some red flags to be worried about. This slide's a little out of order. I'll come back to some of these pieces. So the terrain, the snowpack, the weather kind of relates back to that snowpack. So the safe travel piece, that some of that human component that we want to think about. So somebody's saying his shop roof avalanche today with the warm up. Yes, I was at home this afternoon and I had shoveled the deck and I noticed it started to melt, and I looked and realized how warm it was. It was up to 30 degrees. So a pretty big change from a couple of days ago when it's been pretty cold. So rapid change, and his roof avalanched. Great example. Thanks, Andrew. So stay alert to that changing snow stability due to the changes in aspect and elevation and weather. As you're going up, things change. I did a big long bike ride through the White Mountains this past weekend, and we had temperatures from -15 to, I would estimate, 25 above, just depending on where we were and throughout the day. So there is big changes that can happen, and they can happen pretty fast. And then communicate that with your group. Strong communication. Just be sharing at each break. What are you seeing? What are you thinking? How are you feeling? And you'll be surprised what everybody's seeing and maybe you missed. And always planning to be ready for a rescue, and even having an escape route, a bail route. What's my if an avalanche starts to come, can I, as I'm skiing down, the avalanche is happening behind me, can I angle out of it and get out of that path? And then just never travel alone. It's just not even reconsider it. Just don't do it. You're your own rescue party, and if you're buried, you can't rescue yourself. So when we're headed out with a group, we want to be thinking about what the group's riding conditions and abilities are. I have a snow machine, but it doesn't mean that I'm a snow machiner and I should go out with anybody. I've got an old tired machine that I'm not super confident on, and I'm not going to be hill climbing and setting any high marks with. I want to get better, but I should be telling my partners that up front, like, hey, I've got an older machine and I want to learn. So I want to stick in the flats and play around in the foothills and start to really understand how to carve some turns and do some climbing, and make sure that group is ready to stick to my level. If I have to keep up with them in the mountains, I'm gonna suffer, and potentially put myself at risk. And then when I start getting stuck more and more often and having to dig out more and more, I get tired, and that's dangerous to be stuck and tired. And then if they get in a pickle in an avalanche, I'm wiped for energy and I can't help them. The same thing on a ski mountaineering experience. What type of skiing can people do? What type of equipment do they have? Are they in mountaineering boots and Silverado bindings that have no ankle support, so they can't really carve turns, and they just need to be going up and down a glacier? And then I'm in AT gear with Dynafits and super light, and I'm ready to carve some big turns. We're not equipped to travel together. We need to be mindful of that before we leave the parking lot, and set our expectations carefully. So that human factor in that triangle is the where I want to get to, and facets is a good acronym for that. And more avalanche safety has certainly digging pits and rescue gear is important, but a lot of the stuff has switched over towards this human factor that's what's getting people into trouble. Even that snow machiner that we saw, or the Hatcher Pass avalanche video, for me, it was clear that skier wasn't as strong of a skier, and maybe going off the rock jump wasn't where his skill sets lied, but two people before him had done it. So there's some bro culture there that he's got to keep up with and create a cool kid environment. So he felt the pressure maybe to go off of that, and it caused him to fall and create that avalanche. Or the snow machiner, I got to get the good shot, I'm gonna film Johnny going up and high marking, so now I'm gonna be right behind him, and that puts two snow machines on the slope. Some simple human errors that caused near-death experiences. So facets is the acronym, and we'll walk through some of these human factors that are really important to consider as you pick your partners and head down to the mountains. So here's the breakup of it. So familiarity, I've been here before, and when the snow was like this, it did an avalanche. Great, that's, it's, we were just discussing with Rum Doodle coming up this weekend. We had a group down, there was somebody down there this past weekend on Castle Glacier and saw somebody had skied that line. All right, that's a data point. Somebody skied it and it didn't avalanche. Great. A lot has happened in the week since then. Sorry, I could have a sip of water here. A lot has happened then, so it doesn't necessarily make it safe for us. So, and it's common. We had a close friend within the Eastern Alaska Range Avalanche Center that said, "Oh yeah, early season, you can always find snow up Fossil Creek," and that's where they would go skiing. And maybe for 5 years they did great with that, and the 6th year they went up there and they had an avalanche. But they also had a bunch of red flags that they were able to convince themselves weren't there, because they had this familiarity complex of, I always ski this area this time of year, it should be fine. Acceptance. If I ride that slope, my buddies will be so impressed. That's kind of the Hatcher's Pass one for me. That peer pressure is there. I'm a old mature adults, and I still have that peer pressure of, I'm gonna try and keep up with the young kids. They do it on mountain bikes or fat tire bikes. I'm gonna try and keep up with everybody. 100% is if you're saying that, oh, I don't do that, it's you're lying to yourself, because the peer pressure is there. And the bigger the group and the group dynamics impact that. If you've got 8 people and there's 4 that are really strong and bravado and braggy, and they're pushing it and they're trying to show off for each other, then maybe there's 2 that are a bit more reserved, but they're just going to try and keep up with it. It's a really dangerous situation. You want to really have a good group dynamic that says, hey, yeah, I want to do this, but you don't have to. And I'm going to be really direct that you don't need to, and I would be happy if you stayed down here. There's no pressure to the rest of the group to keep up with me. I feel comfortable doing this. I've done it before, and I want to have this jump or this go up this high mark, but I'm not doing it to encourage you to do it. So really kind of be mindful of what some of those jokes and culture that's created at the slope. And then consistency, this is a tough one, because I made plans to go to the Golcana Glacier. I told people my plans and I don't want to alter them. Sure, yeah, my plan is to go to the Golcana Glacier, and if I needed a rescue, my wife is going to send state troopers to the Golcana Glacier, and if I'm not there, then that's a pickle. But maybe I made a better choice to go to College Glacier because the aspects are better and the snowpack was different. So then being able to communicate that change back to you. And do you have an inReach device to be able to say, hey, we're changing plans, we're going to College Glacier instead of Golcana because of this or that. This example down here, 3 of 11 runs. Trevor Grams, who I kind of gave some credit to for this, he did this big long trip, I think it was Norway, and he gave up on many of the runs because of conditions. And he had to back off of a lot of things. It's much like going down to the Delta Range is a 50-50 chances of whether you're going to have success of climbing or not. You can't you don't have to be consistent in something. Turning around is okay. The expert halo is something I run into a lot. Is if I'm not concerned about the slope, the rest of my party is, because I teach these Avalanche Awareness. He must be an expert. No, I know a fair amount, but I'm always willing to learn and hear other people's opinion and know that there's many more folks that are much more expertise than I am. So I'm really clear with my partners to say, like, yes, I have had some training, but this is a group conversation at all times. And I'm not going to try and convince you one way or the other. We're just going to share our observations. The EMT versus the doctor is, it should be a team working together towards that patient's success, not right or wrong, not a hierarchy. And then tracks or scarcity. That's the classic example of, I've got Saturdays free and I've made this long drive down there. I've got I don't have a lot of time. I've got a scarce amount of time to achieve my objectives. So I'm going to push it. And then this is a little bit like the peer pressure. I don't want to hold my friends back or appear afraid, so I'm going to go with their decisions. If you're having hesitations, there's probably somebody else in the group that has them as well. It's just like when you're hiking up and you say, well, I'm really thirsty, but nobody else is stopping, so I must be the only one, so I'm going to keep going. And it creates the next thing you know, you're dehydrated, and the whole group is, versus everybody was thirsty and nobody had the guts to say it. So it, again, creating that good group dynamic where that conversation can happen, and creating that safe space for people to air their concerns. All right, switching gears. So we've got red flags, things to think about that put the hair on our neck and maybe tell us to turn around. Avalanche terrain and aspect and configuration. We're going to be mindful of that, trying to minimize our exposure. We're working really hard to create a strong group dynamic so that everybody can share their concerns and their observations, and we can work as a real team towards our one objective, whether it's having a good time or summiting a peak. But all those things go sideways and we still have an accident. Before we've left town, before, as we're planning the trip, we're talking about safety equipment. Does everybody have beacon, shovel, probe? Absolutely required. No ifs, ands, or buts. Before you leave town, we're checking those things, and they know how to use them. If they just rented it from Outdoor Adventures on Friday night, you better be darn sure that they're over at your house learning how to use that beacon. Same thing with the probe. Sounds like a really simple tool, but probe, it's a big stick. What's a big deal? Have they deployed it? Do they know how to use it? Using a tent pole or a piece of conduit or their trekking pole does not replace an avalanche probe. An avalanche probe is only an avalanche probe. And then an avalanche shovel. The shovel that they keep in the back of their truck that they got from Fred Meyer's does not qualify. Lifeline, Lifelink, very different shovels. So if you're picking up the shovel from Fred Meyer's, it looks a lot like this one, not gonna lie, but it's garbage. It's not the one that is gonna save my life. If we got further in the trip, and let's say we're at the trailhead, and you pull out your shovel and it's the Fred Meyer's one, I'm gonna give you mine. I'm gonna give you my big shovel, and I'm gonna take your piece of junk because your low budget choice is put my life at risk, and I'm gonna swap that decision on you because I'm gonna feel bad about it when an accident happens, but I want my life matters, and I want my gear, my quality gear, to help save my life. So we want to have all those things. We want to know how to use them. I've got all three here with me tonight. There's not much I can do on Zoom itself. Everybody might have a couple different types of beacons, but you definitely need to practice with them. If you want to come into Outdoor Adventures and borrow an old junky beacon that you can take home and practice with, we'd be more than happy to do that with you. So you can bury the junky one in the woods and go find it, and then use yours to find it with, so that you're becoming more and more efficient with that and fast with it. Same thing with a probe. Pull it out and click it and make sure it locks in there, and stab a bunch of snow with it, make sure it stays together. And then the shovel, having a good shovel. And then we're talking about carrying it in our pack or on our body. It's not buried in our snow machine seat, or what they're saying here on the slide, under the hood of your pack, where it can fall out in an avalanche situation. And the next thing is the Avalanche Bag. This is kind of like a really nice insurance policy. Doesn't guarantee you safety by any means, but it increases your survivability by about 20-30%. We have about 16 people on the call tonight. If we all had an avalanche in our career, 4 of us would maybe die of trauma. We hit a rock or hit our snow machine. Our snow machine ran over us as we were tumbling down the slope. And that's a bad day, but there's nothing we could have done for that. And then another 4 of us died because we got buried so deep in in the snowpack. We just couldn't get rescued in that 15 minutes. The other 8 of us, though, we died because we didn't have the gear. Beacon, shovel, probe, and the bag is how that equation is, or that statistic is coming out with. If we had beacon, shovel, probe, and the bag, we probably would have survived. A lot of people die because they're not carrying that piece of equipment, either to save their buddy or the beacon itself to be saved themselves. We had somebody in a class once that they got buried in an avalanche really close to their friends. They were wearing their beacon, but nobody believed they were wearing their beacon, so they didn't even search for them with the beacon. They said, oh, his beacon died, batteries died last week, so he probably didn't replace it. So we'll just have to find him with our probes. And it took them 45 minutes to find him and get him out. But he did survive. He blacked out, but he woke up once he was dug out. The Avalanche Airbags, there's a couple different versions of one. We've got one here. There's 2 of them at Outdoor Adventures for rent. They're good for day trips. They're not a good mountaineering pack. They're super heavy, especially when you add in all the mountaineering gear. But it does give you a nice sense of insurance. I bought one for myself so that I didn't have my final thoughts were, I wish I wasn't so cheap and didn't bought that bag. So I've got that bag so that when I go on snow machine trips, or I'm going out specifically to ski bigger lines, that I've got that with me. When I go out this weekend on an overnight expedition, I'm not carrying that. So if you're caught, you get up on the slope, everything went south, and you get caught in the avalanche. Some things we can do. Yell and get people's attention. You know, I might be off looking at the sunset, eating a sandwich, or chatting with my friend, and for some reason you went up a little higher. I want to be watching you, so you want to get my attention. Probably not going to be hard to get you to scream when you get wrapped up in an avalanche. Pull your airbags as fast as you can, and then you're just going to fight for your life. Stay on your feet as best you can, and if you're swept off your feet, swim. It's kind of like you just got slammed by a wave in Hawaii and you're trying to get to the surface. You're just going to fight and try and stay on top of that debris. Ways that you can do that are to get rid of your skis and poles. If you're in a snowboard, you're kind of screwed. So it's going to be really challenging to get that off. If you can get rid of a giant heavy pack, that'd be great. The airbags are awesome because they're huge but lightweight, so you kind of float like a cork as you're tumbling down there. If you've got a big heavy expedition pack with a rope attached and 2 skis firmly attached to your ski, or your feet, that's going to pull you down further. So you want to be able to discard those big heavy things. And then as it slows down, you're fighting to stay up there. It slows down. Maybe you're not popping to the surface. Try and clear that snow out of your airway. You've just been screaming and breathing hard. You've probably inhaled a bunch of snow. You got a snowball in your face. Do your best to clear that mouth. I might do a big kind of starfish right at the end there as it's settling out. You heard in the video that it sets up like concrete that's in those final seconds. So if you can spread out and make a last ditch effort, maybe just to get a hand or a foot to the surface. Because when somebody sees your glove waving, they can ditch. They don't need a probe, they don't need a beacon, they just come right to you and dig and try and get to your mouth. And then if you can, create a little air pocket. You're clearing your mouth, but maybe you're pushing that snow out from in front of you. And then go to your Zen place, go to your happy place, and calm yourself. You've got a defined amount of air available. And if you're panicked, you're going to use up that air a lot faster. If you're calm, cool, and collected, you can breathe a lot slower and relaxed. Is that hard? Yeah, absolutely. You're near death. You're buried in an avalanche. You're confined in this big, a claustrophobic space. Going to your happy place, I suspect it's going to be pretty challenging. I've never been in an avalanche, so I can't speak to the exact circumstances of it. I can say that one of my friends who was fully buried did that, got his hand to the surface, but knew his buddy was also probably fully buried, was able to dig himself entirely out. The snow that he was in did not consolidate down, did not set up like concrete. He had a little one hand free, and he was able to shake it free and dig away and dig away and dig away and get to his face and push that away, and then finally dig his whole body out and dig out. And he says, thankfully, his skis were still attached, so he could get to his skis and use those to ski out to the road to get help. But it's a little of a side story, my apologies. So that's if you get caught. Really, you're just gonna fight for your life and then try to calm down and save as much oxygen as you can. The next thing is if you're the rescuer. So the person yelled at you, "Avalanche, avalanche." I'm gonna watch them. I'm gonna watch as best I can, and I'm watching to see where they last showed themselves. I don't have to search above that. If I say, oh, I definitely saw them. I saw them, their green coat and orange boots go by. They were next to that tree. Okay, I can start my search there. Then I'm going to think about how safe the scene is. Is there a big avalanche slab above them? Is there a chance of a secondary avalanche? I don't know. And then I'm going to organize my search, and that's putting my beacon, when I'm wearing it, when I leave the trailhead, it's transmitting, it's sending out a signal all day. But now I need to switch it to search, myself and all the rescuers. I don't want to say, okay, I'm the head rescuer, I'm going to go into search, you guys just stay there. Because when I go to search, all I'm going to do is going to find all those 4 people, and it's going to be really hard to find my person that's buried. So I need everybody to go to search. And now you're vulnerable because you're no longer transmitting. And we're going into search. We've marked our last point seen. We're looking for clues. You know, I'm going to search, I'm taking charge, but maybe Sean at the same time, he's scanning it, looking to see, maybe he just sees Andrew waving his hand above the snow. I don't want to drop anything in the search area, and that's it confuses the search. It might give some other clues to have a good day, Joseph. And like if I drop my hat and gloves in there, people might get confused, and maybe that's part of one of the victims. And then we don't want to do that. We'll talk about this zigzag pattern in a second, but essentially we need to cover the entire surface, entire slide area looking for them. But long story short is, don't send help. This isn't the time to get your in-reach out and start texting. All right, I'm going to text my wife and my buddy's got a snow machine. I'm going to text him. Maybe he can come help me. And I've got these 2 other guys that are pretty cool mountaineers. I don't want to. That's not helpful. Not even texting 911 is helpful. All those seconds are wasted. You are the only chance for that person to survive. You need to get in there and get your hands dirty and figure it out. So if this is our last point seen, then we can kind of zigzag from there. You know, this is our last point seen. There's no way they're all the way over here. They didn't travel horizontally across the slope during the avalanche. So we're going to do a little bit of a zigzag bell shape. If it's just me and Sean got buried. I last saw him wave here. And then go back and forth, search. My beacon finally picks up a signal, and it's gonna kind of arch me in there. His signal, the radio waves, sending out these in concentric circles. So it's gonna kind of circle me in there. That's not, it's not a mistake. If I have a bigger search area and I've got more people, I can go to that last point seen and spread out, and we're kind of just painting the whole surface looking for that signal. And the person in the middle catches that signal and it sings them in there. And I'm going to say, I got a signal, I got 27 meters, 25 meters, 20 meters. And I'm running down there trying to get as close to it, as lower as the number as I can. And once I get that, these other 4 people, they're going to keep their beacons on search so they don't throw off my search. But they can stop focusing on that and maybe get their probes out, get their shovels out, and start to think about the strategy for the rest of the rescue. Snow machines are, you know, a little bit unique. There's lots of computers and electronics going on with a snow machine that can confuse your beacon. So maybe use that for that initial sweep for clues. You know, I might use the snow machine to zip up here and see if I can see anything, get a higher perspective on the debris field. But once I start searching with the beacon, I'm going to turn off the machine and leave the sled behind me. I don't want the snow machine to interfere with my beacon signals. And that's the same for, you know, GoPros with Bluetooth communications, and my iPhone that I didn't take out of airplane mode, and my GPS device and my inReach. We've got all these electronics. We want to keep them away from our beacon. We say that it should be like 24 inches away from our beacon, and our phones are keeping them pretty distant. So my beacon's up here on my chest and my phone is down in my thigh pocket, or it's completely turned off and it's in the back of my backpack. We don't want to keep the chest pocket on this side with the phone that's in airport mode, but with Bluetooth to my earbuds, and then the beacon right next to it. We're going to separate those pieces away. So then as we take our search and we lower, you know, we're 10 meters away, then we get to 3.0 meters away. We're getting really close. And then we do this delicate plus method that really just paints a grid over it, and we do it nice and slow and steady. We're keeping the beacon at the same plane, the same orientation, and we're drawing a box. We're confirming that, yep, 1.6 maybe is our lowest reading, and every direction I go, nice and slow, it goes up to 2, 2.0, 2.2. And I draw that box around that, and then I can probe from there. And that's the next slide. If we start probing in a spiral pattern, about 25 centimeters apart, or that's about 8 inches. And we're probing that spiral pattern nice and straight and calm, up and down, pushing deep as possible until we hit something that is different. We might send it down, you know, we've got a reading of 1.6 meters, and then we stick it in there and we get to we get to 2.5 meters, 2.5 meters, 2.5 meters, 1.8. Okay, it's not 1.6, but as 1.8, and it feels different. Maybe I'm hitting a ski boot, or maybe I'm hitting a belly. It's soft and spongy. That's different than snow, and really hard and firm, and it maybe has that plasticky feel versus a rock. That's a good thing. And then we keep that probe in. Now we found it, we're going to keep it there. You don't pull it out and go, oh yeah, it's over here. You want to keep it there. Snow gets very confusing very fast. And then we start to dig. And that's where the digging has become a real focus, because takes up the most time. The beacon is fun, and it's a really expensive and nerdy piece of equipment to use. That's cool, but it doesn't take a lot of time. It shouldn't take a lot of time. And then probing is pretty fast if it's not a super deep burial, which is great. It leaves us a lot of time for digging, because digging takes forever. Because at 1.4 meters is a ton to a ton and a half of snow. And I don't use that just as a generic use of the word ton. It's that much snow. That's how much you've got to move around to get to that person. So rather than getting this probe and digging straight down and trying to bore down to them, we're going downhill and digging in towards them. So we're digging into the slope. This is their slope. We're digging in here so that we can pull it, kind of extract them out. So in this picture, we're digging in there, we find them, and we can pull them out here. And we've got this nice trauma table. So remember, 25% of our people die of trauma. He might not be dead, but he's probably got some significant trauma. Now we're into first aid, and we might have to do CPR. We might have to splint a leg. If we dig straight down, we're stepping on top of them. We're constantly having snow fall in on us. We've got to pull the snow up and out versus using gravity to our advantage. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a whole bunch of nerdy measurements that you can get out there and study. That if the burial is 2 meters deep and you've got 3 diggers, you want to go downhill 1.5 meters. There's all sorts of some equations in there that are quite honestly impossible, not impossible, but difficult to memorize, and would be really hard to memorize in a stressful situation. So my rule of thumb is the depth that they are buried, that's the depth downhill that I'm going to go, that distance downhill, and then I'm going to dig in towards them. And I'm going to dig in there, find that probe, and kind of go down a little bit and dig in. The other piece is that these 2 people that are digging, they can dig, break it up and slide it back just a little bit. And this person can take that snow the extra step further and throw it all the ways away down the slope, again, using gravity to their advantage. And as soon as one of these people are tired, they can cycle out and cycle in. You know, it should only be maybe a minute that people are working really hard up front, breaking up blocks, moving, and then they can shift to the other side for a minute, break up blocks and move. And then they come out into the back system here, maybe take a little bit of a break, and they're pushing snow further away and really cycling through. Same thing here, we got 2 up front, breaking up blocks. You got the other people here pushing the snow further away. This looks like in a pretty flat spot, so it's not the same. If I was to have one piece of advice for everybody, if you had further time and you wanted to invest in some further training for yourself, it is, oops, I stopped my share. Sorry. This is Backcountry Access, who makes the beacons that we rent at Outdoor Adventures, BCA beacons. They have a number of wonderful videos on all sorts of avalanche avoidance, avalanche rescues, and then there's some digging videos in here specifically about how to dig. It's kind of silly. You're like, oh, we live in Fairbanks, we know how to dig on snow. You're absolutely right. We're the best snow diggers around, but there's some real strategy into doing it in an avalanche situation. So just like here, we got the probe, and we're gonna be pushing that snow further down the hill and cycling these people out. So in a rescue experience though, some common mistakes that happen is that we don't have a leader taking charge. We've got, oh God, there's an avalanche, it's a stressful situation and people are bumbling around. They're just doing what they know. Oh, I learned that presentation with Mark that I should go to search. Okay, I'm going to go search, and then I'm going to start looking, and oh, not everybody went to search because I didn't communicate that out loud. So somebody should maybe take charge and say, all right, well, I'm going to take charge right now. Let's go. I'm happy to take other people's advice, but let me step up. Then just an inadequate initial visual search. You miss some obvious clues. Like you're so focused on, oh, finally I get to use my hundreds of dollars in equipment, and you miss the person kind of waving right at you. So don't miss the obvious clues. Not all beacons turn to search. Every time I do a beacon class outside, that happens where somebody is relaxed, or oh, Johnny's got the signal, I'm going to put it back in my pocket, and they turn it back into transmit. Or you're not proficient with the beacon. These BCA ones are pretty simple, but often you're borrowing something, as a new mountaineer, or new snow machiner, or snowshoer, maybe you're borrowing some equipment and you haven't studied it as well, and you're not as clear on how to transmit or search with it or what the other functions do. So I would encourage you to become familiar with one beacon and just stick with it. Some people just get panic and they just start digging. Like, oh, he's 2 meters away, dig, 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 dig. The probing it's an extra step, but it saves you a tremendous amount of time. It's a pinpoint search. So it really is helpful. And then that poor shoveling technique, you're moving snow twice. You're just inefficient with your snow technique and you're wearing yourself out. And it's just taking more and more time. I've got one last video that I think really demonstrates some of those and all those mistakes at once. So we've got a skier coming down the slope here. Avalanche happens.
Watch him.
Watch him. That's a good signal. Okay, there he is. Yep, there he is.
Yeah,
Whoop.
watch him.
He disappeared. Don't see him.
Okay, Karen, give me your beacon.
Karen, give me your beacon. What?
No, give me your beacon. Yes. No.
So,
okay.
Why doesn't this guy who claims that clearly is the expert
Unclip your buckle.
give me your beacon? He's doing good about being calm and collected. He's not panicking.
And switch backpacks with me.
Karen's a little stressed. He doesn't have a shovel, so he's going to switch backpacks and get Karen's
You gotta have
backpack.
to take the whole thing off. Just take the whole thing off.
Somebody just asked about scene safety. Is it going to avalanche again? That's good. She's trying to unclip her beacon.
Kelly, just stay there.
She's taking her jacket off. She's trying to take the whole harness off.
Can you come out here, please?
There's the beacon, there's the whole harness, okay. He zips it into his pocket. Let me get my gloves on. Let me get my pinky in there. Screw it, I don't need gloves, okay. Had about a minute and a half has passed already.
Into it. He's right down there. Go this way and then back across. Don't go down here. Yeah. Come on. Come on. You can see him. You don't need the beacon.
You can see him, you don't need the beacon. So they just wasted a minute and a half because they didn't do any initial search. There he is.
You're good. I'm right here. You're good.
There's that hand sticking out that we talked about. So that's, now 2.5 minutes or so. This guy's been under snow, waving, wondering what the hell's going on. There's the shovel blade. Don't bother getting a shovel handle. That would be too silly. So it goes on from there, but it's kind of just a little bit more clumsy digging. His hands get cold because he doesn't have gloves on. He's digging with just a shovel blade. Had this been heavier snow, a little bit deeper burial, you can imagine how darker that could have gone. Biggest concern for me is that not everybody has beacon, shovel, and probe. Had that gentleman had his beacon, it would have been much faster. If he had been buried, would have never been found. So just to kind of wrap it up, we talked about terrain, talked about snowpack and red flags, and the weather had some red flags in there. That human factor is at the core of it. We need the human to cause the trigger on the avalanche. But we want to be really responsible within our group dynamics. And I really encourage you to pick good partners because of that. And got a couple of chats that have shown up now. I believe early, a serious convexity. And then thanks so much for your time. It was a great refresher. It's cut out early. So that's all I've got. Typically in an in-person class, we maybe pass around some equipment. I would let off the airbag here, but I'm happy to take questions. People can unmute themselves. Don't be shy. I'll stop the screen share for now. Any specific questions or things I can help out with?
Well, thank you so much, Mark.
I've got,
if anyone has any more questions.
Yeah, I've got one question about, where can folks get additional education? And great, thanks for the reminders. So the biggest provider for education in the state right now is the Alaska Avalanche School out of the Anchorage area. They're providing level 1, level 2, there's recreation type trainings, and then there's folks that want to go on a professional track. Then there is specific snow machine courses. The Eastern Alaska Range had one based out of McLaren Lodge in February. So there's a number of different courses around the state. Alaska Avalanche School is most comprehensive and centralized version, but it would be down in Hatcher's Pass and Turning an Arm. If you're interested in Valdez or right now, the Eastern Alaska Range and human-powered courses, we put a little bit of we got stalled on due to COVID, frankly. We don't have level 1 instructors in Fairbanks, excuse me, and with travel restrictions and concerns like that, we weren't able to plan ahead enough to coordinate a level 1 this year. But you could look at alaskasnow.org is a good spot to start with, and start looking at courses and see what things you could find available at, looks like Haynes has lots of different programs. They've been really good. And then Alaska Avalanche School is the next place. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments, concerns? Again, I would really encourage the Backcountry Access website as a good option to learn other information. Obviously, the internet is full of trainings and YouTube videos and such, but BCA is obviously a recognized organization that's going to put out a quality product and quality education and keep up with the times. I think if I can, before people jump away, I'm going to put a little survey in the chat box, and if folks are able to take a second and complete that, then I can frankly get some compensation through a grant for the ERAC fundraising. So just a quick Survey Monkey, and you fill that out, and it just gives me a little bit of evidence to go back to our grant. We have a grant through the Department of Public Safety that helps support these programs. Yeah, BCA is Backcountry Access. They're a gear manufacturer. They make beacons, shovels, and probes, but also have a bunch of education with that. What are places to find information for the best places to ski and the ski routes in the Delta Range? I don't have a good answer.
I think the best information for ski routes is people coming back from trips that have had a lot of experience in the area.
Yeah, the Eastern Alaska Range and Alaska in general does not spoon feed you the best routes and where to park and what up track to take and what down track. The Eastern Alaska Range requires a level of finding a friend and going out and adventuring and getting some, Look Erie Basin and Rainbow Basin are typical spots that people start to experiment with and fairly accessible. And then going from there, there's lots and lots of lines, but it just takes some exploration, and there is not a good guidebook for that. There is a little bit of a guidebook for climbing and mountaineering itself, and you can make the assessment of whether it's a ski descent or not. Yeah.
So Mark and Sean, I wonder, is there any way that information like pilot reports, aviators often will report conditions that they saw when they were flying in a certain region, and especially if there's something hazardous. Could the Eastern Alaska Avalanche Center possibly have like maybe just the Facebook page that could be the home for that kind of information?
So yeah, so both, so we do it. So we have the Eastern Alaska Range Avalanche Center Facebook page, which will share observations that are
oh great
there. But then on alaskasnow.org, you can go to the different regions in Eastern Alaska Range, and then there's the observations page, and you can see where people post. There's different observations that have been posted there. You know, as recently as the 13th. Doesn't look like many folks posted from last weekend, but there's some decent observations there. And so I would encourage folks to submit an observation. So you can be up here in the corner and hit submit your own observation, and fill in the information here. You can add a picture if you know your lat long, or you can zoom in and drop a pin on the Google Calendar or the Google Earth. Upload your video or your picture and submit that observation and share that with everybody.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's good to know. That's a great resource.
Mark, is ERAC doing another giveaway this year for observations? I remember they did one last year.
It has not come up in conversation yet, no.
Well, this has been a great presentation. Thanks to you guys for taking the time and energy to do it.
Happy to help. And so Outdoor Ventures is happy to share as much resources as we can as well. Again, the equipment's available for rent, so don't let equipment be your excuse. Even the Avalanche Bag is a nice thing to have. It's a nice opportunity to experiment with that, and hope to see you out there.
All right, great.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Especially thank you, Mark, for giving us that very informative talk. I would encourage all of you, whether you have taken an AVI class or not, to go seek further education. And Mark mentioned that ERAC is a pretty new organization and they don't have a whole lot of resources. So if you have money to spare, consider donating to them as well.
You can donate or volunteer too. We're always happy to take support. If people want to be on a board or a part of a charity or become an educator or staff different events, there's opportunities for folks there. But certainly we'll take your money too. And we'll use that to support education and support. We built a weather station down there. The Look Erie Snowtell site up in past the Rainbow Basin site is a weather station that we built and facilitated and paid some money for, and we're working on adding more weather stations. We've got another weather station ready to deploy. We're just working on the politics of it.
Well, just a reminder, we have 2 more ski mountaineering clinic lectures coming up. We have a basic gear and mountaineering gear lecture next week with Nick Jansen. And we also have a glacier lecture planned with Joanna Young coming up in a couple weeks on April 15th. So stay tuned for information about that. If there's no other questions, we can go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you everyone for coming.
Have a good day.